Welcome back to Bay Sunday. There are 4 basic elements when it comes to the alchemy of cooking: salt, fat, acid, and heat. My next guest worked at Chez Panisse, that famous restaurant here. Samin Nosrat, the author of a new cookbook called Salt, Fat, Acid, and Heat, Mastering the Elements of Good Cooking. Welcome to Bay Sunday.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to hear about your new book. I love to cook. I'm not saying I'm a great cook, but I truly am amazed by what you're trying to do in this book, inspiring people to cook even though they might not have that much experience.
Yeah, you know, it sort of is the manifesto. It's the distillation of my philosophy. And I didn't know how to cook when I walked into Chez Panisse, which is really an American institution. And over the course of a couple years in the kitchen there, this was the sort of philosophy that I formulated, because the menu there changes every day. And I didn't know anything. And this was sort of, I realized this was how all the chefs navigated their way through the kitchen, because they don't use recipes and cookbooks. They sort of just know how to cook everything every day when they come in.
It's almost instinctual.
Yeah, it's your, like, I think of it as the 4 points on the compass guiding you through the kitchen, yeah.
Tell us how you got started, because you were a student at UC Berkeley and you somehow ended up at Chez Panisse. Tell us about that.
Pretty much everything good in my life comes from a letter that I wrote. So I had a boyfriend when I was a student, and we saved up our money for 7 months to eat at Chez Panisse restaurant.
Wow.
And it was a really incredible meal, and the dessert was chocolate souffle. And when the server brought it, she said, "Oh, have you ever had souffle before?" And I said, "No, please show me how to eat it." And she said, "Well, you poke a hole and you pour this sauce in, and that way every bite has sauce." So I took a bite, and she said, "How is it?"
Right.
And I said, "Wow, it's amazing, but it would be so good with a glass of cold milk." You know, like
yeah.
brown,
Chocolate
warm thing,
milk
cold milk,
go
right?
well together, yeah.
But I didn't know at the time that it's kind of considered like unsophisticated to drink milk in a fancy restaurant. So she kind of laughed, and she brought me wine, dessert wine as a gift, and then also this milk, and it was this very sweet thing. And I was so inspired by this experience that I wrote a letter to Alice Waters and to the restaurant asking for a job as a busser. Right. And I brought it in, and they hired me on the spot. I think they were very desperate, but the woman who was doing the hiring was the souffle lady. And so she recognized me and she gave me a job. And I sort of from day one just was so enchanted by the cooking and the cooks and the food, and all of my senses were so inspired that I begged them to teach me how to cook.
And how did it go from there to writing this book? And I know along the way you've also written for the New York Times as well.
Yeah, it's been a long road. You know, I came to college as an English major. I've always wanted to write, so it was an interest that I never let go of, even as I started cooking. And when I realized that this was this kind of tool to navigate through the kitchen, and that it didn't match up to anything that I was reading in any cookbooks, I really thought at that time that I would start a book, writing a book. And I got out a legal pad and I started writing. This was 2001. Right. So I still had a lot to learn about cooking and writing. And then about 10 years ago, I took a class at the UC Berkeley School of Journalism with Michael Pollan, who's a great journalist who writes about food and food issues. And he hired me to teach him how to cook, because he was going to write a book about cooking. So as I was teaching him, he noticed my obsession with these 4 elements, and he encouraged me to turn it into a curriculum and then into a book. So yeah, it's been a great road.
What else can we find in this book? Because I was kind of perusing through it.
It's kind of like 2 books.
Yeah, one thing I noticed was there was a recipe for mayonnaise.
Oh yeah, there's everything in there. So the idea is, if you can learn how to use these 4 basic elements, you can do anything and make anything taste good. And there's something for everyone. If you've never, you know, I didn't know the difference between parsley and cilantro when I started cooking. So
big difference there,
yeah. So I sort of, you know, I'm trying to speak to everyone, but even people who have been really serious home cooks and even professional cooks for a long time have told me that they've learned from it. So there's some basic science. There's sort of a guide for how to taste and to look, what to know when you're tasting, to let taste really guide you in the kitchen rather than recipes. And just cues to help you understand what it is that's happening.
Right. You know, my mother-in-law is an excellent cook, and I watch her cook, and I try to emulate some of or copy some of the recipes, but it really comes down to, I think, practice, because you kind of figure out, all right, how much salt do I need to put in, or certain types of meat you want to cook at a higher temperature.
Yeah, absolutely. Practice is everything. People even respond to me, you know, on Twitter, email me, and they're like, "You're lying. I can't just use these 4 things." And, you know, the 4 things plus practice.
Right.
But tasting and being aware, and also I think taking joy out of what you're doing is really important too.
Right. And for the New York Times, when you write these pieces, are you focusing sometimes on, what exactly are you focusing on?
I do 2 kinds of stories for them. So I love food as a pathway into culture and into how we relate to each other as humans. So I wrote a recent story about Persian New Year. My family's from Iran, and I wrote a story about our foods and how sort of they haven't really penetrated the American consciousness. But I also do guides teaching people very basic things, how to make soup, how to make pasta, and it's really a great pleasure for me.
We really thank you for joining us here on Bay Sunday, and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you.
Again, the book is called Salt, Fat, Acid, and Heat, Mastering the Elements of Good Cooking by Samin Nosrat. When Bay Sunday returns, a group that's rebuilding together San Francisco. We'll be right back.